The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with News Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping shape it. Welcome back. Hope you're all well. I am very excited about a new collaboration that I'm involved with. Many of you will know a previous guest, Carly Barton, who set up CanCard. CanCard is a medical cannabis ID card recognised by the police. And it's a validated indication to any third party that you're consuming cannabis for medical reasons. They have over 75,000 patients registered. It's a fantastic scheme. So CanCard have teamed up with a great company called Grow Lab Organics, or GLOW for short, who are based in the Isle of Man. GLOW have secured a growing license in the Isle of Man. They're in the process of building their facility. They're really great guys. I've got to know Alex, Charlie and Charlie over the last few years, and I really love what they're doing. Carly is such a powerhouse and a really positive force for this industry and representing patients, so it's a great combination. GLOW are crowdfunding on Seeders at the moment, and with CanCard, really want to establish a community-owned cultivation business that represents patients. I'm super pleased to be working with these guys, and they're some of the best people I've come across in this space, and they're really doing things in the right way. So I'm 100% supportive of them. You can get involved too. I posted some links on the Cannabis Conversation LinkedIn page on Tuesday, 6th of June. So please check them out. Usual caveats about investing at your own risk, etc. But there's plenty of info on the Cedars site for you to check out before you get involved. They also managed to secure some great coverage in the Financial Times on the weekend. And I think there's a TV documentary in the offing, so lots to be excited about. On to some other great people in this space, my lovely sponsors from Lumino. Lumino have recruited for numerous businesses across Europe. They've recruited for businesses in three key areas: plant-facing, commercial, and medical. They're always happy to chat. So as always, if you need any help with HR or recruitment, please do get in touch with them at luminorecruit.com. And please do mention my name when you do. Now, on with the show. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Nicolas Martin and Andreas Becker. Nicolas and Andreas are two journalists from DW, and they are hosts of a podcast called Cannabis Cowboys, which is about the JuicyFields scandal. Guys, welcome. How are you doing?
Hey, Anush. How are you doing?
Thanks for having us.
I'm very good. It's a rare sunny day in London, so I'm going to get outside after this podcast and enjoy it. Doesn't happen very often.
So we keep it short.
Yeah, exactly. There's quite a lot to talk about, though. This is a very interesting topic and one that anyone that's active in the space will know about. So I'm really glad to get you guys on. And I really enjoyed your podcast, but we'll talk about that in a second. Maybe we usually start with a bit about your backgrounds and what you guys did previously, and maybe you talk a bit about DW and how you came to make this series.
All right. Well, we're both journalists at DW. First, a few words about DW. It's part of the German public broadcasting ecosystem. In this case, it's something, let's say the German version or attempt of being like something like the BBC World Service, meaning it's a radio station, it's an online service, and it's a TV station, all in all 32 languages. So the main focus is to broadcast stuff into different countries in different languages. That's the main focus. And one of the programs is in English and one of them is in German. They have a variety of things, among them podcasts. And I've been there for almost 20 years, and my training is I studied journalism and economics and English Lit, and have been working in the economics department of Deutsche Welle for quite some time now, and been covering, stuff ranging from international trade to banking to development finance, this kind of thing, mostly. So this is also a new attempt, and the reason we've been talking about this was basically because of Nicolas.
Yeah, I'm also at DW since about, 10, 12 years. I didn't really celebrate my anniversary, but I think it just passed some days, years, or month ago. But anyways, my background is I'm studied regional science of Latin America. So I was more or less looking a lot at Latin America, learning the languages. And then I came to DW, where actually I continued with my journalistic career that I started before at the radio, and at DW, I also at the economics department with Andreas. And I think it was in 2017 when Germany legalized medical cannabis, when I started to have a look at the field. No, I started to look at this emerging industry, and obviously I had to look at Canada, at the US, where things already were much further developed, and somehow pitched a few stories on the medical cannabis market in Germany, and I wrote about it, and then I went to a few conferences, and finally in 2021, I went to a conference in Berlin, a very big business conference on cannabis, and there JuicyFields was one of the main sponsors. And well, I've never heard of JuicyFields before, but they were very present. So they had some fancy cars before the venue, and they had a very big stand downstairs. And the interesting thing was nobody really wanted to talk about JuicyFields. So that got me thinking a little bit. I filed my story on actually the latest developments in medical cannabis in Germany. And then together with Andreas, I started to think, okay, maybe this could be a very interesting podcast for DW. Let's find out more about JuicyFields because, well, on the one hand, you have this German startup, so it's a German story. But for DW being an international broadcaster, it's also interesting because it has this worldwide dimensions. No, we saw there were e-growers from all over the world, people that actually bought virtual cannabis plants. We can get into that later if you want, but I guess your listeners, they know what JuicyFields is about. And then we thought, okay, let's pitch this story to DW. And DW was, cool, an investigative podcast. Let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's see how it turns out at the end. And that's how we started. Actually, Cannabis Cowboys, I think it was somewhere in January, February 2022. So it's more than a year ago when we actually started to dig a little bit. And actually for us, that was a pretty lucky move because we met the people from JuicyFields. No, we talked to them. We talked to some of them and we talked to frenzy investors. And obviously this is something that makes a story also more interesting if you have those voices before they disappear.
Yeah, what Nico is saying is we started our research, I think 4 or 5 months before the company was exposed as a scam or imploded or however you want to call it.
I was just about to ask the timeline. Yeah. So that was quite... And to what exactly piqued your interest? I mean, it sounded too good to be true. Most people in the industry who understand what was going on knew what it was. But I guess you guys are slightly outside it. What piqued your interest that thought, actually, this is worth exploring?
If I may start, because I didn't have any connection to the cannabis industry. Nico was doing the stories about how the market is doing in Germany and how the whole industry is developing. I didn't really care, honestly. And when he came back and pitched this story and said, look, there's this company, and we looked into it, for me, without much knowledge of the industry, what piqued my interest was the promised rates of return. Because they say if you invest this much, and if you do the math and look at how much you get, what they promise in a year, you basically get 100% return. You double your money. And for me, this was like, as a classic business journalist, was like, doubling your money within a year is pretty rare if it happens at all. And that was my starting point. And for Nico, I guess he had also other things more specific to the cannabis industry that might have triggered him.
Well, at the end of the day, it was also the rates of return. No, I mean, this, like you said, 100% is not possible in any industry, especially not guaranteed. And JuicyFields somehow guaranteed that rate of return. But obviously, it was also the fact that people didn't want to talk about it. And they just talked when the microphone was off. And there were already some voices that said, okay, it could be a scam. We're not sure. And then it somehow also felt a little bit like like an obligation to look into it, no? So that was kind of the intriguing thing. So we started to look at what else did they promise? And we saw they said they could produce cannabis for 20 cents to 30 cents a gram, and not recreational cannabis, but medical cannabis. And from everything that I heard so far, that was a number that was way too low to make any sense. We know that cannabis producers, they do not really talk about how much they produce cannabis for. It's a little bit of their private secret, obviously, but we know it's not 20 to 30 cents.
So just before you carry on, maybe we take a step back for the few people that don't know what's going on. Maybe you can provide a high level of what this was and maybe still is, I don't know. And then we can get into some questions around it, I think.
Well, JuicyFields basically said, look, we have a website here, and this website gives you, normal internet user, the opportunity to participate in this growing business that is the medical cannabis industry. They were specifying medical cannabis. They were not saying illegal drug dealing or whatever. They say medical cannabis is a thing that becomes legal, is already legal in certain places. There's lots of money involved, and the only people profiting is the people with money, the big business guys who can afford to have plantations and all this kind of thing. Everybody's making lots of money. But now we give you, the normal internet user, the chance to participate, because you can buy through our website virtual cannabis plants, and the level of entry is 50 euro. All you need is 50 euro. We do the rest. We make sure that for each cannabis plant, virtual cannabis plants you buy, somewhere in our plantation, somewhere in the world, an actual plant is being planted, raised, harvested, packaged and sold, and we share the profit with you. And the profit is, calculated through the year, is 100% basically. So if you have 50 euro to spare, do it. And because the cycles were smaller, it's 3 months only, and then you get something like 30%, it was, for many people attractive, because you put in 50 euros, that's what we did, and 3 months later, they paid you back 70, for example, 75, 68, whatever. And in 3 months, you realize, it worked. You got money in your bank. And that was basically the thing that made them attractive to many people, and many people took them up on the offer, no?
And it was a lot of people. I mean, we talked to them, and maybe for your listeners that are really familiar with cannabis, it seems kind of absurd to invest into JuicyFields. But there were many people that did. And like Andreas said, they put in once, they tried it out for 3 months. It worked. They put in more, and they put in more, and they put in more. And at the end, we had people that invested 80,000 euros, just a single household, that invested 80,000 euros. Some other people invested 60,000, 30,000, but it was quite some sums that have been invested from what we've researched.
Do you have an estimate on how many investors there were?
It's pretty hard actually to estimate how many there were. JuicyFields said there were 500,000. But obviously, we
can't believe anything they say.
Exactly, but it was also part of the game, of the frenzy game, no? To like every month they pointed out we have 300,000, 400,000, 500,000. So that was just actually to make people feel like a movement that we're in. No, we're growing, we're getting stronger, and we know how to actually make money. We estimate, there are estimates that are a little bit more conservative that range from, let's say, 100 to 150,000, I would say. Andreas, what would you say?
Yeah. And also, like, some police investigators were guessing at the total damage of several 100 million euros. Some even go higher, reaching the billion threshold. But again, since nobody really knows exactly how many people were involved and the numbers have not been confirmed yet, it's kind of hard to say. But there were a lot of people who lost a lot of money, because at some point, the thing that usually happens in these kind of Ponzi schemes is that this cycle was broken and suddenly people couldn't access their accounts anymore and nobody knew where the money was and people just didn't have any recourse to anybody. And up to that point, for about a period of 2 years almost, the thing hummed along nicely. People put in money, people got money regularly, and for 2 years, the whole thing functioned well, and there was nobody complaining. And we started looking into this about half a year before they went bust, basically. So at that point, there were no victims yet. There was nobody who said, I put in money and I didn't get money out. There was nobody who said, they scammed me. And so our initial motivation was, we want to have a look at this business model that seemed fishy to us. And we want to find out if it can work or cannot work. And if we cannot prove anything, at least we can raise some doubts and make people aware that they should be careful when when they're being promised 100% return on investment. That was the initial approach. And then during our research, the whole thing...
JuicyFields was faster, we could say, no?
Yeah. Which, of course, changed the game. Yeah.
And that was, luck is probably a bad word to use, but you were midway through investigating this story and then the really juicy aspect happened.
Yeah.
So how did you approach that?
Well, first of all, after it was middle of July, when investors couldn't access their accounts anymore, when it was clear something went wrong, when all the social media channels were suddenly emptied and there was no content anymore, JuicyFields was very present on social media. They were not shy, they were present on the big cannabis fairs and on the conference scene and publicly, they posted videos on Instagram and they were really present. And suddenly they went silent and people couldn't access their accounts anymore. And at that moment, of course, there were lots of people talking sometimes on social media, but also talking to us or to other people and saying, hey, look what happened. I lost my money. And then lots of theories evolved. So suddenly there was a mass of theories and of information. So it was kind of, for us, it was like almost overwhelming, because there were so many different information pointing in all kinds of directions that in the beginning, the quiet procedure we did, like trying to understand the business model and trying to see if it was legit, suddenly turned into, look at this mass of information, what's wrong and what's right. It's kind of hard to discern. No? Do you remember this?
Yeah. Well, at first I remember when JuicyFields actually folded, it was like, okay, we were right somehow with our suspicions, but then we're also asking ourselves, should we have published something earlier, but there was just not enough evidence that we could have put on the table? And then we said, okay, now what are we going to do? And then we decided, let's look at all these theories, go through them, work through them, and try to provide at least some guide our listeners or readers a little bit through this jungle of information, no? Provide them something that is valid, because there was so much noise. And still there is so much noise out there. And so many informations are not backed up.
Yeah.
And a podcast, by the way, a podcast is the perfect way, because it's a very long format. You can go through all the rabbit holes. You can explain. You can tell where you're uncertain with some facts. You can be very transparent in everything you do. Yeah, that's what we try to do with Cannabis Cowboys.
Yeah, and it's really, really good series. You go in lots of different directions. And I like, as you talked about at the beginning, just the simple financial analysis. I always like putting things in context. And anyone that is promising 100% return within 6 months or whatever the crazy timeline is smells fishy. And, people at conferences in Lamborghinis and all of this nonsense is just massive red flags for me. But this is a slightly wider question than just this. I think it's a sort of societal problem. I, about 6 years ago, fell down the crypto rabbit hole and tried to understand what it was all about. And I must confess, and I don't claim to be the smartest guy, but I'm also not the stupidest guy. I couldn't really understand what it was all about. It feels like I don't really understand where the value is, but it feels like it's this big example of FOMO. No one really understands it, but no one wants to miss out. And so I actually fell for a scam, I suppose you'd call it, although I kind of knew it was, where it was around Litecoin, and a very similar concept where I put some Litecoin in and they every 30, 60 days would give me something back. But it was very sophisticated because they prey on your greed. And they say, well, you can take some money out now, but if you invest it back in, we'll give you double of that. And you just think, oh, I'm making money for nothing. And again, I think this is a societal problem. People really think they can be rich by doing nothing. And so There's an interview, I think, where you interview a couple of people that invested, and it's really interesting to say like why they invested. They say, oh, I saw the website looked really good and their social media was excellent. They did no research on the market whatsoever, but they were going based on those two things alone. How do you see these things, through your experience of speaking to people and a kind of wider society?
I would agree with you immediately when you say this is a societal problem. I mean, it's enough to turn on your Instagram and see that even outside of the cannabis bubble, there's loads of offers of people telling you that you can make a lot of money if you do this or that. And even if it's only changing your mindset and taking some kind of coach advice and pay for that. So it's the social media is full of these kind of offers. And that was one of our intentions, to tell a story that is on the one hand entertaining because it's like a true crime podcast, but it's also in the sense educational because you can see the mechanisms of how some people use your weaknesses, use your hopes and dreams of maybe, getting lucky and actually making money without any effort, and then turn this against you and using it. And I think JuicyFields did this well. And also, I mean, the way they presented themselves was well done. And also it fed into this wider story of like everybody had heard that there's something going on in the cannabis industry. Turn on the news and you see it's being legalized here, it's being legalized there. So it doesn't take much to think, wow, there's a big market in the making, and suddenly there's somebody offering me the chance with all the elements of the usual internet stories. We are Legion, we are the crowdfunding, we are, the little guys. We give you the chance, and we use the power of the internet and of social media, and we all profit. That's a story that people just love to hear.
I agree totally. Like this societal aspect to it, everybody wants to find a way to get rich quick, and everybody has heard of somebody who has heard of somebody who got very quick rich with, you mentioned, some kind of cryptocurrency, be it Bitcoin, Litecoin, or whatever you name it. And then there is this next big thing, which is cannabis, obviously. And there is this wider narrative around cannabis that it's just going to be so huge, and everybody who's in the game is becoming rich so quickly. So it's like a mixture of this societal thing with this huge narrative about cannabis. And yeah, people just got trapped now.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like, the crypto bit is you don't understand it, but people appear to be making money. Whereas cannabis is something at least someone can relate to. And the assumption is that people are making tons of money. Everyone in the industry will very firmly tell you that they aren't. But from the outside perspective, it definitely seems this way. So if you combine the two, it's quite a potent, seductive story, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned it, everybody in the industry knows that these growth rates that JuicyFields put up on the table, they are not realistic. So that's always also one of the main reasons why we started digging into that thing, no? I mean, we all know that the booming times of the Canadian cannabis industry, I mean, it just all went down to much more realistic out views, no? So taking that into consideration, the JuicyFields story was just too good to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, it then sort of meanders a bit into, or not meanders really, but just sort of moves into stories of fake aristocrats and organized crime. And it could be a novel, really. How did you find that? And did you ever feel in danger at any point?
Yeah, I mean, if you enter the dark sphere, somehow it becomes darker, no? The further you go. And the thing is, it not only became dark, it also became stranger. It became so strange. I mean, you mentioned these aristocrats that somehow were involved into building or putting up the JuicyFields structure. I mean, just digging and seeing who was involved as well, or somehow involved, was making the whole thing so strange. And then, I mean, at the end, we're actually ending up at the Russian border, now talking to a whistleblower that supposedly tells us the whole story of JuicyFields. And yeah, I mean, obviously you can feel that the path you're taking, you should be cautious, no?
And from a storytelling level, it was funny in the sense you have in the very beginning, you're researching a company that promises to grow and process and sell cannabis for you. And they sell you a virtual cannabis plant, which turns out never existed. So there was a lie from the beginning. And then each person you look at, each person involved, turns out to be not exactly what this person claims to be. And each story they put out turns out to be not exactly right. So each corner you turn, there's another smokescreen. And sometime along our research, we had the feeling like this, it almost is too much of that, like you cannot even believe that even that guy is not really what he claims to be. And even this is not true. And it looks like somebody just made up the whole thing. So it had this very entertaining element, but also a very spooky element, because you had the feeling like, is it really possible that like each corner gives you another, empty story, you just make you dig and go into another rabbit hole?
Well, look, in the slightly more legitimate side of the medical cannabis industry, people are being liberal with the truth and saying they have licenses when they don't. So this is not that dissimilar, but, a bit more fraudulent, let's say.
But it's funny that you mentioned that, because in an industry where there's a lot of, posing, it maybe makes, a little bit more brazen posing just seem a little bit, fits in. It's okay.
I think you're right. It's such a small industry, and I think people are having to kind of embellish, let's say. So maybe it doesn't seem that out of place that this is a bit more brash in their approach.
Talking about the industry, and JuicyFields also brought in a lot of money into that industry as well, no? They were sponsoring conferences. They brought in a good vibe with their after parties. We went to one of these after parties where everything was for free, food and drink, good music. And this Lamborghini story that everybody knows, I guess, who is somehow familiar with JuicyFields, parking in front of this luxury hotel and stuff like that, it just gave the whole industry a feeling, it's booming, we're rocking. There is money to be made. So, Yeah, everyone was sort of slightly willing to accept it, I think, because they kind of needed the image uplift. So, look, as we come towards the end, where are you guys now? I assume you're moved on to working on other stories and stuff, but is this sort of still there in the background if anything big picks up? JuicyFields is still with us in a way. Currently, we're not investigating any further. We're doing a German version. Well, there is lots of thoughts on books on this crazy story, on maybe even serious, but nothing so concrete to talk about right now.
But we're having the ears open, because there's still lots of things that might happen, and maybe even happen soon, because there's some people who are saying we want to get the investors' money back through legal means. So far, there hasn't been major developments there, but if there are, we have a look. We include this. If there are major lawsuits, for example. Then there are, in all of Europe, there are several police teams investigating the story. I don't know when they come out and present their version of the case, but when they do, we definitely will have a look, and we'll see if there will be arrests, if there ever will be anything. We never know, but we definitely will follow up on that too.
Yeah, and Cannabis Cowboys, it's a podcast with 8 parts so far, but I'm pretty confident that sooner or later we're going to produce a 9th part. The story is not definitely far from over yet. And where you can see it is that JuicyFields, the platform itself, again, is up and running, and it's selling cannabis plants, virtual cannabis plants. How crazy is that?
As if nothing ever happened, you can still go there and you can still pay, and they're still promising you some returns, as if nothing ever happened. Despite, tens of thousands of people who went to the police and lost money and all this, still online, still running. And you wonder, what went wrong here?
It's crazy. Is it because of the global nature of the internet? It's quite difficult to find the right authority to shut this stuff down?
It seems to be the reason. And there has no lawsuit yet been, to say, okay, this has been a Ponzi scheme. This was illegal. There have been some raids, But so far, the investigators are far from actually showing results, you could say, So somebody was smarter out there until now. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like these schemes have been going around for a while and they just applied it to cannabis and they have a sophisticated setup. It's very sad. But guys, do you want to just tell people about where they can listen to Cannabis Cowboys and before we wrap up?
Well, the easiest way is you type in Cannabis Cowboys into your search engine of your choice and it will lead you directly there. We are on the usual platforms from Apple and Spotify and all that. And another way is to go through Deutsche Welle's website, which is dw.cannabiscowboys.com/Cannabis Cowboys. That's it. That will lead you straight there. And all the other podcast platforms will have this podcast as well.
Brilliant.
And we also ask, since your podcast is directed also to the industry, if somebody is out there with something he wants to tell us, we're open also for any tips and hints. That's what we also ask for in the Cannabis Cowboys series. And you can write us anytime at cannabiscowboys@dw.com.
Yeah, because as Nico mentioned, if we find something interesting, we will not hesitate to do another episode.
Something interesting and valid, because new information is out there all the time, but we're looking for something valid that leads us somewhere.
Fantastic. Well, guys, I'll definitely put all your details when I post this. And yeah, it's a really great series. So I highly recommend it to any of the listeners that want to find out a bit more. And yeah, the words of advice to just be careful what you're investing in. Sounds pretty obvious, but worth remembering.
Yeah, I realized you didn't want to go too much into the details of the cannabis industry, huh? Did you?
Well, I'm just going to assume that everyone kind of knows that already.
I mean, we didn't mention names. We didn't mention any. You're still recording, come on.
Yeah, let me switch off now. Guys, really great to have you on. And there's definitely going to be more that comes out here. So I look forward to having you back on to talk about the next stage when we know a bit more. Thank you.
All right.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I'm a commercial lawyer and I work with a number of cannabis businesses in the UK. If you need help with commercial contracts, data protection, employment, corporate, or other business legal needs, please do get in touch with me via LinkedIn or at astonished@canvas.global.